Well, hello, my name is Lonnie Stepler, and we are a few days into the year 2021, and I wanted to take some time to share with you some resources that I have found to be helpful. This is one of the things that I want to do with this YouTube channel, is to share different resources that hopefully might be helpful to you as well. So with that, I will dive in. So one of the resources is in regard to spiritual growth. This is one of the books that whenever I encounter a time in my spiritual walk with God where I feel dry, or I know I want to change things up because I feel like I'm stagnating, I can go to my bookshelf, pull this off, and know that I can be renewed in some way, or find an idea in how to infuse some creativity into my walk with God. So the book that I'm referring to is the Spiritual Disciplines Handbook, and the subtitle is Practices That Transform Us by Adele, Ahlberg, Calhoun. And this is really not one of those books that you would read through start to finish. It more serves as an encyclopedia of sorts of spiritual disciplines. We might also call them spiritual rhythms. And if you're looking for a book that is more something you would read through start to finish on this topic of spiritual disciplines, I highly recommend Richard Foster's book, Celebration of Discipline, The Path to Spiritual Growth, another great resource. But right now I would like to focus with you on the Spiritual Disciplines Handbook, and then delve into a couple spiritual disciplines that I have been cultivating for a while, and in 2021 want to continue to be intentional with cultivating these particular disciplines. But before I delve into those specifics, I want to share with you how Adele Ahlberg Calhoun, the author of this, how she starts off this book, because I think it is genius. So she takes the word worship and she makes it into an acronym, and the table of contents then delves into each of these different aspects of worship. So the W in worship stands for worship, and then she has several spiritual disciplines within that. For example, celebration, gratitude, Sabbath. The O in worship stands for open myself to God. Some spiritual disciplines in that arena are examen, journaling, simplicity. The R is relinquish the false self. Some specific spiritual disciplines in that area are solitude and spiritual direction. The S in worship stands for share my life with others, and a couple of those spiritual disciplines are community, hospitality, and mentoring. And the H stands for hearing God's word. A couple of those are Bible study and meditation. The I stands for incarnate the love of Christ. A couple of disciplines there include compassion and humility. And finally, the P in worship stands for pray. A couple types of prayer: conversational prayer and praying scripture. And then in each of those, she has this table. So this is the one for celebration. So she starts off with a quote that kind of frames the discipline. She has a table for each of the disciplines that goes into what is the God-given desire that this spiritual discipline is designed to help meet. What is the definition? So what is this actual discipline? What's the scriptural foundation for it? What does this practice include? A few ideas there, and then God-given fruit that you can look forward to in your life if you cultivate this. So if we compare the spiritual life to a field, and like we are having a role in tending the soil of our hearts, these spiritual disciplines are means of tilling the soil, means of watering the soil, means of nourishing the soil, so that God's seed planted in us can bear his good fruit in our lives through the Holy Spirit, through his word, through his body, and through us. So then after she goes through that table, she shares some thoughts on the discipline, and then she ends each one with some reflection questions, and some spiritual exercises, and finally some resources to go deeper in that area. And it just so happens in the discipline of celebration that she references this. I had forgotten that, so just saw that now. She does reference a specific chapter, I guess. Anyway, so that is the basic format of the book. Going back to the acronym at the beginning, the word worship, and then categorizing all of these disciplines into one of those different aspects of worship. For me, I think that helps keep this practice of spiritual disciplines in perspective, because our human tendency can be to become legalistic in our relationship with God. And so if we view spiritual disciplines, the things that we do, the acts that you might say that we participate in to cultivate a more meaningful walk with God, if we view it as worship, a way to connect with Him, a way to love Him more deeply, I think that can help prevent us from engaging in these practices in a legalistic manner. So now, with that introduction, I now want to shift to sharing with you 3 of the specific disciplines. I already went into celebration a little bit, but the 3 disciplines I want to highlight now are ones that I've begun to cultivate in my life, but in the year ahead, I want to continue to be intentional with these. So the one is celebration, another one is examen, and the final one is simplicity. So one of the ways that just in the last week or so, I got a jump start. So before 2021 started, I got a journal, and this has been a way that in the evening, before I go to bed each night, I try to just take a few minutes. It doesn't take very long, 3 or 4 minutes, and pull that journal out. And this is where I am being intentional with practicing celebration and also examen. So what does that look like? And as I share that, I'll delve a little bit more deeply into the disciplines themselves. So in terms of celebration, this might sound funny, but I sometimes have to be intentional with looking for things to celebrate. And I have to be intentional with cultivating joy, because I can tend toward the heavy aspect of life. And I love how she alludes to this in her reflection questions for the discipline of celebration. She says, if there is a heaviness about you, an overly serious side, or an entrenched critical spirit, how might celebrating God affect these traits and move you into new areas of transformation? So I do recognize that about myself, that I can have that heaviness about me, that overly serious side, that entrenched critical spirit. And because of that, I want to intentionally cultivate this discipline of celebration. Other people more naturally engage in celebration, and maybe they need to be intentional with moving to the serious side on occasion. So again, that journal is one of the really practical ways that I'm cultivating this discipline of celebration in my life. So how I'll do that is at the end of each day, I just bullet point. I try to do 2 or 3 bullet points, and of those, ideally, at least 2 of them would be celebrations of some sort, gifts that were given throughout the day, things, and sometimes they're very small. They're, in the grand scheme of life, they're very small, but they were glimmers of joy, glimmers of hope. I heard a phrase once of slits in the curtain of heaven, like just those little moments where you maybe experienced connection with God in a rich way, connection with other people in a rich way, the fruit of His Spirit in a meaningful way. So I also use that journal to engage in the spiritual discipline of what she calls examen. And this is short for examination of consciousness. But what I try to do with possibly one of the bullet points, I let myself do all celebration if I want. But there are times where I want to jot down something that I'm kind of sorting through, or maybe a hard part about the day. And I'll bullet point to that as well. I don't so much delve into it in a deep way in that in that journal, but it can be then a segue to deeper conversational prayer with the Lord. And I want to read to you what she says about this discipline of examen, one of the paragraphs. She says, "The examen is a wonderful tool for discerning the places you feel most alive, most grateful, most present to the fruit of the Spirit, as well as the times and places where you do not. Those with melancholic tendencies may find that while the day's low points stand out clearly, they need the examen to help them recognize the life-giving moments the Spirit brings during the day. Those naturally inclined to optimism need the examen to help them name the difficult things in life. The examen invites attention to both low and high points, recognizing both of these as an invitation to prayer." So what I might do is in that bullet point just jot down something that caught my attention that maybe was difficult. And not that I have to understand it all, but that's just a way to express that to the Lord. Sometimes it's just expressing it and letting it go. Sometimes I sense in expressing it, He wants to go deeper and maybe work on something in my heart with me. And so that is a little practical way, using my journal, those bullet points, that I engage in the discipline of celebration, but also examen. So examen can have that positive or negative aspect to it. Celebration obviously focuses more on the positive. Next, the other discipline that I have been cultivating in the past, but want to continue on with that in 2021, is the discipline of simplicity. And I won't go so much into that here, although she does have a good summary of the discipline of simplicity here. I would like to share with you a couple other resources in this area of simplicity that I have greatly benefited from. So the first one is by Joshua Becker, and the name of the book is The More of Less. The subtitle is Finding the Life You Want Under Everything You Own. And actually, while hopefully I can find it here, as I was glancing over this discipline of simplicity here again, I think it's so interesting, she asks this. One of the reflection questions under simplicity is, how has the more is better mentality shaped you? And so I love this book that is countercultural in so many ways, The More of Less, because in our culture, I think we are continually inundated with this message of more is better, like this question says. So how has the more is better mentality shaped you? And Romans 12:2 is a verse that I oftentimes want to remember, and it guides some of how I choose to live my life. It says, "Do not be conformed any longer to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, His good, pleasing, and perfect will." So we know that our culture that wants to conform us to its mentality is this more is better mindset. And so how do we counter that? Well, according to that verse, we renew our minds. And part of the way that I renew my mind is to read books. It's part of the reason I love reading, because our culture wants us to live a certain way. It's not always the best way. And so I love this idea. Instead of the more is better mentality, the more of less. And it really has been a freeing process to learn to let go of things. And for me, maybe some of the most difficult areas for me to work at minimizing and actually letting go of things and stuff has been paper. And what I mean by paper is I save things, anything I think is valuable or might be valuable in the future. I have a tendency to just save it, and that stuff can really build up and be burdensome, and then I have to go through it all. And also electronic files is another area. I have a tendency to save links and resources I find online, things that spark ideas online, or I think I might want to refer to at a future point. Again, that can build up and be frustrating. I can save a lot of things on my phone, save screenshots of things that I think are going to be useful. I don't take a ton of pictures, but even those, the ones that I do take, because then you have to organize them and I feel like I have to utilize them. Whereas if I just minimize all of that, it can be so freeing. Sentimental things is another area that's really difficult for me. So paper and books, electronic files, and sentimental things are the last three areas that I'm trying to minimize. I feel like for the most part I've minimized other possessions, although there's always other things I find that I can go without. But it also affects my purchasing patterns. I find that when I go places, I'm not as inclined to think I need to own things for myself. I can just see it, appreciate it for what it is, and not need to possess it for myself, which is really freeing. So this, again, is a great resource if you're wanting to begin your journey of minimalism. Another great resource that helps motivate me and encourage me along the process is a YouTube channel called The Minimal Mom. She's wonderful. I love her ideas. I love how down to earth and personable she seems. So again, The Minimal Mom is the name of that channel. So I think I read this, The More of Less, a couple years ago. And then this past year, I read this, The Minimalist Home. And this is more practical, as it says, a room-by-room guide to a decluttered, refocused life by the same author, Joshua Becker. He also has some great, if you go on YouTube, he formerly was a pastor, and now I think part of what he does is travel around and speak about minimalism within church settings. And so that's another great resource if you're looking not to spend any money and want to just go online and find some inspiration. His books aren't so much, he touches on a couple spiritual things but doesn't go into a lot of depth in that. More his speaking is for that, whereas his books seem to be more action-oriented. So I would highly recommend this one first. I think it helps get your mindset in a good place regarding things, and then following that up with delving into your own stuff and minimizing. And also, and this I would say is deeper, this was a book from this past year that was maybe the most challenging to me to read. And it's called Freedom of Simplicity by Richard Foster. So it's actually by the same man who wrote Celebration of Discipline. And it's recommended under Simplicity as another resource in this one. If you want to go deeper, she recommends this book. And it was a very meaty book for me to read. And yet I felt like going deeper increased my conviction that this is something I need to work at. And he focuses not just on simplicity of tangible things, but also how we use our words in business, how we market things. He touches on all of that, which has been really good for me and has caused me to look at the world differently and to make some decisions differently than I otherwise might. So, in terms of practical application of how I hope to continue cultivating simplicity of my life and minimizing possessions, is by delving into those areas I already mentioned that I'm kind of they're the most difficult for me, but I'm there, and I have started to work at minimizing these areas, but I have a lot more to do. And that's the area of paper clutter. Books, I feel like I can do more, but I've already let go of a fair number of books, which was really hard for me, but I did it. And sentimental things and electronic files. So those are some practical things that I want to continue on with and maybe even finish in 2021. And when I say finish, some of those things you're never going to finish completely, but finish the backlog, and maybe some of it's just, I just choose to get rid of it rather than file it or organize it, but just let some things go. And then have a system for keeping those things under control in the future. So I hope that this video is helpful for you. I hope that it encourages you to think about some spiritual disciplines that you can be cultivating in the year ahead. And I just want to highlight that for me, celebration and examen, those disciplines are maybe more internally based, like they're more, the spiritual focus is obvious, and the other is more outwardly based in a way. Now they both have the other as components, right? Like celebration and examen have external expressions, but they are more direct spiritual ways to interact with God directly, whereas minimalism and simplicity are more based on the outer worlds, but they do have spiritual implications. And I would encourage you to think about a spiritual discipline in each of those areas that you can cultivate in the year ahead. So one that is like direct Godwardness, like you're explicitly focusing on Him. And then maybe another one that is more indirect Godwardness. It's maybe more focused on the outer worlds, but it does impact you spiritually and is an expression in some ways of your spiritual life. So hopefully that didn't all lose you. Thank you for your time. I hope you found this beneficial. And if you did, I encourage you, give it a thumbs up and feel free to share it with someone else that you think might enjoy it. All right, take care, and I hope you have a wonderful 2021. Bye-bye.